I was able to notice was Gaza Strip. You know, it's in negative 20%. That's a lot, but you can tell, like, you know, what outside influence is getting under. Another thing is about Congo, like those areas that are undeveloped and basically, basically they don't have their own central government, you know. So you learn a lot about, basically from this website, is how do these countries function. And the funny enough thing that I was looking on, basically when I was researching is TripAdvisor, Travelocity, they all point to this thing. They're like, if you want to travel to a country, not Afghanistan, you know, but some like modern country, will tell you like how the culture is over there, how to interact and everything. So Ed, when you go to Portugal, Brazil, definitely, you know, this might be helpful with that, to talk about the whole lingo and everything.
It'll tell you about Afghanistan too.
Yeah.
It'll also tell you not to go there. So.
Recommended, but embassy.
Yeah.
But yeah, so here's the thing. How does it play into this? You know, like right now it's 2017. You know, 2027 is where they're saying is they're going to be major developments in automation and basically manufacturing. It's going to come back to the U.S. That was the theory, but it's not going to be coming back in labor. It's going to be coming back in more automated form. You know, so how does this connect to us? Well, the world economy is more gray and more interconnected than ever before. So you can't really put in the 1970s, the 1980s. You know, when the EU was formed, or the Reagan era, that people like to call. You know, those were the simplistic times. Now it's more about basically what countries are going to be leading the charge in the future and what countries are developed right now. So right now, the US is part of the OECD. What that is a group of 15 countries that basically are developing countries. They're the developed countries. The thing about that is, in the next 20 years, just a fun fact, because I was actually surprised by this, was the United States is actually going to be, right now, it represents 23% of the economy in terms of GDP, gross revenue. That's actually supposed to drop to 18% by 2030. So we're actually supposed to basically give up that slide, you know. I won't say give up the slide, but it basically talks about, like, you know, now we're developed, what other countries are going to be competing. The competing countries in the next 20 years is going to be China and India. China is actually expected to, right now, it only represents about 17%, but it's expected to grow to 28% by 2030, and actually at 35% by 2060. So it's actually supposed to take a lead. India is at a more modest percent at 11%. But that tells you to show you, you know, like, you can learn a lot about where the countries are going to be going into, how the GDP factors into this, and that's what they were touring. Like right now, you know, with the political chaos, basically for a specific country, you know, basically the regulations that are being made and everything, those significant regulations can actually impact the GDP and everything, and the investments. So that tells you the most real, I should say. Which brings us to the beef, you know, where Dan is going to take the lead, you know, about how does it basically help the individual, you know.
So, you know, you live in a country, or you want to visit a country, you want to know, you know, am I going to be safe there? Am I going to be taken care of? Is where I'm living a good place to live? And how do we decide that? You know, is that just based on how much money I make, how much people make on average, so GDP per capita? The answer is a little more complicated than you might think. So, you know, just looking at it, just having a couple basic questions. Does a country with the highest GDP per person have the lowest infant mortality rate and the highest life expectancy? So, if I'm in a rich country, am I going to, one, survive being born, or my children, and am I going to have a long life, a long, healthy life, right? So, according to our book, the statistics in our book, the country with the highest GDP, Norway, does have the lowest infant mortality rate, and is just below France in life expectancy. France is a little lower on, as far as the highest GDP. On the CIA site that Rashid mentioned, with more current information, Monaco has the highest per capita GDP and the lowest infant mortality rate and the highest life expectancy. So apparently that's the place to be. And conversely, Somalia has the lowest per capita GDP and one of the worst infant mortality rates and life expectancy, which I feel like we can kind of imagine considering what Somalia goes through.
Monaco is an African country, right?
What?
Monaco is an African
French
country.
province.
Yeah. It's not on Africa.
Europe.
I think
Monaco is in Mediterranean.
you're thinking about Morocco.
It's very low.
It's
in the
very
Pyrenees,
low.
like in the
You are
bottom
France
of
is
France.
below.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's
it's
very
the
low.
Mediterranean. It's bordered by the Mediterranean Sea.
Oh, but
The Balkans,
No, the Pyrenees.
the Pyrenees.
It's a French colony, right? It was a French
Yeah,
colony.
I mean, it's what's the name of the prince that is there?
Prince
Albert.
Yeah, what's his name?
Is it Albert?
Albert.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
He's gonna live a long, healthy life, and his children are gonna survive.
Morocco.
It's the guys
Oh,
besides
no,
Canada
Morocco.
that
Yeah,
are
Morocco is in
Morocco.
Northern Africa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Somalia is in Africa, and it's a mess. Yep. So we looked at GDP per capita. You know, U.S. wasn't the top, so are we all? You know, again, you freak out. My country's killing me. Where can I go? Well, take a second, take a breath. You're probably okay because the U.S. is still pretty high up there. But you know, it's not all about GDP per capita. Other poor countries can do better on these measures of well-being, depending on some things we'll talk about in a second. And that leads to the question: Can we be misled if we just look at GDP per capita? And the answer is yes, with some qualifiers. So here's some information about GDP versus well-being. We have rankings on infant mortality rate, life expectancy, and GDP per capita. This is from the book, but there is some information I have from the CIA site here. On the infant mortality rate, a lower number is worse. So that means you have a higher number of deaths per births, right? U.S. has it's a relatively low rate, low ranking, which is good, out of 225. And we have a pretty high life expectancy and a pretty high per person GDP, right? So on average, if you look at general sections in these rankings of per person GDP, you can very easily guess what country is going to do better from a well-being scale. However, when you start looking within those sections, it comes down to really the policies of the government, how the country is utilizing their resources, capital, etc. To promote these policies for health and social well-being. So these are just some representative countries here that we, for the most part, we know. Some of the interesting ones: Czechia, which used to be called the Czech Republic, and I threw in Monaco and Somalia because they were the highest and the best and worst as far as GDP per person and also life expectancy and mortality rate. So what are the takeaways from this? There are several problems with looking at just the GDP as a measure of well-being. Some things GDP doesn't take into account, right? It doesn't take into account things like, outputs. It only measures outputs, so it doesn't take into account things like crime, work-life balance, stress level, etc. Any unpaid childcare. So if someone is staying at home taking care of your children, you're not paying them. That's not included in GDP. And for the most part, this is straight out of the book. It's pretty much one of the problems with GDP as relates to the definition. It said, it doesn't say anything about the actual distribution of the output society. So again, that's going to come back to the social policies that are in effect. And it doesn't reflect losses or social ills such as pollution or quality of life losses due to increased production. So we can be making a whole bunch. So if you think one of the countries that comes to mind is Japan, where everybody's working like crazy, but then people are committing suicide or working. You see that they have a word for it. I can't remember it, but it's a Japanese word specifically for working yourself to death because people have been doing that. So GDP doesn't reflect you working yourself to death. So conclusions. Before you go moving off somewhere, do your homework. Right. You need to take a closer look at countries with a high GDP per capita. You can look there to kind of narrow in on an area that you may want to go to, or a country that you think will do well, or conversely is doing very poorly as far as taking care of its people. But once you start narrowing in, you really need to start looking at their social policies and how they're utilizing their resources to decide on whether that's going to benefit you. And with that,
Just want to add in is basically if you see China, their GDP is growing but they're actually at the same time combating with coal, you know, the pollution that is in there that is not really reported into it. They have their cancer rates is actually increasing also. Those health facilities, they're not also being added into that. So that's a great point that Dan is making. Like that's not an old picture that GDP reflects.
Yeah, I guess a good example, if I back up for a second, is just an example of where GDP per person kind of fails as a good indicator is if you look at Ireland and Czechia. You can see their rankings here on GDP per person, but then when you actually look at life expectancy, so Ireland is ranked about 10 less than the U.S., but they're actually slightly above as far as life expectancy, and their infant mortality rate is almost double, or almost half that, I guess is the word I'm looking for. Czechia, which is even lower on the scale, has almost the same life expectancy and an even better infant mortality rate. So again, when you start getting into similar areas here, it really comes down to the policies that are in place. Again, and the first example right here is France. They're much lower on the scale, and they have a significantly higher life expectancy. I mean, 2 years is significant, and again, about half the infant mortality rate. So when you get into the same sections, you really need to start taking a closer look. The comparison between the U.S. and Somalia, there's no comparison, right? When you're at different ends of the spectrum, there's no chance. And again, I think it points to the fact that if countries are going through some major shocks, and also they're war torn, or the government's failing, that is they're not going to have a chance to build up. Forget about social welfare and things like that. They're not going to have a chance to build up their GDP because things are falling apart. So the countries have to get up to a certain level before they can start really increasing their GDP quickly. And then once that happens, they can start thinking about how are they going to distribute that wealth for the betterment of their society. I think with that, we're looking for 40 questions. I think we made our time.
The word is karoshi.
Karoshi?
Karoshi.
Karoshi. There you go. Thank you.
It's also prevalent in South Korea too.
There we go.
Karoshi.
Yeah, karoshi.
So you're gonna make some money and you're gonna die.
I had it last year.
Yeah, exactly. It was like some ridiculous number of hours a week. It was like she was pretty much working all day every day.
Yeah, problems with people coming home from work, leaving work, and just like falling asleep on park benches in like full business attire because they're just so tired that they can't even make it home.
It's insane from
Yeah.
at least from our cultural perspective.
I just have one question. Did you see any stats about countries that have gotten up higher in the ranks, and what led to that? Do you have any?
So actually, there's an interesting case of well, I don't know if this isn't got kind of a general answer for how all countries do that. There's multiple ways to do that, but I think an interesting case is a backup. I don't think we have it in the actual slide, but as far as talking about blah blah blah. What was the question? Forget the questions, but basically, as far as will underdeveloped countries grow faster, so their marginal GDP be automatically higher than say more developed countries. So an interesting case was Iceland. They were already pretty high on the ranking as far as GDP was concerned, and they were still able to have a high marginal GDP per year. This was especially after the recession. It was an interesting case because they kind of went a different route than a lot of the other countries after the recession. They put in a lot of capital controls. So basically, foreign investors' money was trapped within the country, and it's controversial because some economists are saying that once they release that money, they're not going to have any investment, and their economy is going to fail. But for now, at least at the time of the articles that I read, they were doing well, and they were able to increase their marginal or keep their marginal GDP high. Also, that coincided with a shift in the type of output they were doing. It was mostly fish, tourism, and something else. And what?
Aluminum.
And aluminum. Yeah, and they switched over to a renewable energy and information technology focus. So that's been working well for them. So, you know, I don't, like I said, that doesn't directly answer your question, but so I don't have a general answer as far as how countries do that.
But I think we were looking at something like, it hasn't happened yet, but everybody is hearing about the UK. You know, the GDP so far has been phenomenal, let's be honest, you know. But the thing is, they're going through a Brexit route, and in 2 years, there's going to be a lot of capital that's going to be moving out of the UK. And they have already started to think that it might go into recession again, because so much banking factors and everything, and that will hurt when the unemployment comes out. And they have a great social welfare also that are going to take a big hit, because majority of the taxes and everything is driven in the UK by those services. So we're going to see a change in GDP with that most likely 2 years. It hasn't happened now because they're still negotiating the final Brexit entry like we were looking at.
Yeah, I mean,
But
yeah, as far, if you think about it, as far as just keeping your marginal GDP high, you need a place to go, right? So if we think back to our aggregate demand and supply curves, right? It's like, where are you on the curve, right? You know, if you're already at capacity, if you're at almost at your long-term equilibrium, there's nowhere really to go. In the case of Iceland, they probably wouldn't have been able to keep their marginal GDP high if they stayed with, you know, their typical, you know, industries, right? Because they switched over, there was room to grow there, and then that changed their whole supply curve, right? So now they can start utilizing their capital for, you know, to a greater extent for those areas. So I mean, if you're already at capacity and you don't have any kind of, yeah, you need to think of something new to do, I guess, or increase your capacity in some case, which would be either technology or take over another country for more land or something. Yeah, I need capital. You know, otherwise there's nowhere to go.
Yeah, and that's where the issue is, because there is the solo model, you know, in growth theory, which is standard in and convergence theory. I don't know if you saw that. So that believe that you know, undeveloped countries somehow will catch up with developing countries, because it takes the ratio of labor to capital. So there are a lot of countries like India, China, that they have a lot of labor, right? But is the human capital is not there. So even though you have the labor, you don't have the education, the experience, or, you know, the capital to use that one so that you can converge and catch up with the faster developing countries like the European and the US. So, you know, it's something to look at, but, you know, so far the theory, you know, hasn't worked, because again, the reason is the infrastructure is not there, and if it is not there, the political reasons again come into the picture, where, you know, how do we invest and reinvest, you know, the output that we get out of, you know, the leisure to capital output.
Yeah, you need to get to like a certain level before you can start, you know, kind of really increasing your output. If you don't have, like you said, you don't have the capital, it's not going to happen.
that's very true, because as we were looking into it, we saw China and India, perfect examples of democracy and communism. With China, government has very strict controls about what money flows in, what money flows out. India is rampant with corruption, which actually hinders the stability. That's why it's not growing that long. And like you were saying, Professor, like the workforce is very cheap in labor. They're going towards the education route, but they were saying even in 60 years, when those countries catch up, they were saying on the graph, I wish I could show it, the US is still going to be over here, and those countries are still going to be over here. They're going to catch up, definitely they're going to have improvements, but it's not going to be anywhere in the US or the EU. Even how EU will shrink about to 90%. The 12 countries that they have, the head start that they had, they will still keep that momentum, even though it might slow down. So that was very interesting to take on that, you know.
Pack your bags and go to Monaco.
Yeah, exactly.
Very good.
You can all go there before and check it out. Oh, yeah, sure.
so I think so.
Oh, that's the. Yeah, so we're continuing what, those guys did.
Great
And
minds
green
think
sketching
alike,
also.
so we like to see if you could.
Our agenda is, on my part, is to talk about the current interest rates. And Maha will be talking about the economic growth, which is also GDP, right? And Ed will be talking about unemployment rates, and Angela will be talking about the inflation. So for my part, for interest rate, so U.S. interest rate is is controlled by the Federal Reserve. It's created in 1913, right? So it's responsible for setting monetary policy. It has 12 members, 7 board governors, and 4+1 rotating one-year term presidents or different titles. And this is all their region. So you have the Boston area. So New York is this little part. Philly is here, and it gets larger and larger. I don't know what that means because I didn't look into it. But yeah, so that's where their control is for each governor. So the latest race was happened this Wednesday, and it passed with 7-2 votes. We had 2 dissenting votes. The people who turned down the votes were from Minneapolis and the Chicago governors. I forgot their name, but yeah, they said we should leave the rates as it is because they don't see why they should raise it. So the rates is up to between 1.2 and 1.5. And next year may see another raise in January before Janet Yellen leaves. But that's not sure yet, so we're still waiting for other data. And consumer inflation is staying around 1.7 this year. And the long-term growth is forecasted to be 1.8, but because they're still not sure what's going to happen with the tax cut, they might expect it to go up, the GDP growth. So yeah, okay. So this year we had a few hurricane-related events which did affect the Fed's decision to increase the rates. But they said it did not have any meaningful effects. But they're also forecasting that they may see a different rate between. They said the previous one says 1.8, but they're also saying that there might be a 2.5 or a revision to it. It might grow up. And economists are saying that an extended inflation soft patch is giving the Powell Fed a free pass to continue along the Janet Yellen gradualist path toward policy normalization. That means it might grow, but it might just stay the same. Also, they don't know what will be the next step. And the Atlanta's Fed, who monitors the GDP, they say might grow next year, 2018, GDP might go to 2.9. That still remains to be seen. So looking forward, there is no new rate increase expected in January, but you never know because earlier I said they might raise it, but they're still waiting to see how the economy performs. They did not see also wage growth and price gain. So they're still not sure what to do with that. And also unemployment is really low, and it's supposed to go to 3.9 by the next year, sometime next year, next quarter. So this is puzzling economists. They're not sure how to proceed, but they're also expecting inflation to rise because unemployment is so low. So everybody will have some money to spend. And this is the data that I found from Bloomberg. This is the rate, the green line is where they expect the interest rate will go, and the yellow ones are where they think, where other people think where the rates might go. There's 3 rates I was supposed to look at, and those were the discount rate, prime rate, and the federal fund rate. As you can see, the federal fund rate is here, and it just went up to 1.25 or 1.5. The prime rate is way up there. That's prime rate was,
Rate the banks charge.
that's the rate banks lend out to customers. Yeah, and the federal fund rate, think that's the money that banks lend to each other overnight. So as you can see, right now the trend is going up. And this is a longer term data from what happened before, like from '99 to now. So since the crash, everything was really low. But before that, we had a high rate of between like 10% for a prime rate and federal fund rate, which was around 7%. I don't know why the discount rate just stops here, but it just stopped. I mean, it begins around the 2001, 2002 area time frame. Since the interest rate increased, there's a lot of things that happened, and you can see that the S&P fell by 0.1. The Dow Jones and the Dow Jones, blah blah blah, it went up, and there's all kinds of stuff that happened at this, right after the announcement. And also you can see also that it also affects foreign currency exchange. So euro went up, and the British pound went up also. Bonds went up a little bit also. Same thing for Germany and Britain. And commodities, gas and stuff. I think gas fell a little bit, and other commodities like metals went up and down according to how the market went. And this is the Treasury data, how much money the Fed would give interest rate. So that's the current rate. As you can see, it's going up. And yeah, this is it.
Okay. All right, I want to talk about US economy, going in depth a little bit about GDP. So as you all know, current GDP numbers, quarter 3, 3.3, increased up to 3.3. When compared to Q2, it was 3.1 of this year. Down. All right. Economic growth is measured by PEA, that's an organization which measures our economic growth. And in 4 categories: national, international, regional, industry. These are the 4 categories in which the Bureau of Economics measures the growth. All right. Even national economic growth is measured in the following categories: GDP, personal income, consumer spending, corporate profits, and fixed assets. We'll see how they did in these categories. I'm sure everybody knows GDP, personal consumption expenditure. GDI is the sum of incomes earned. Current dollar estimates is CDD. Personal consumption expenditure is what we pay for the goods. I needed these definitions because I'm going to talk about these down slides. So as you see in Q3, we are positive. Real GDP increased, GDI increased, current dollar spend increased, PC, consumer price index increased, corporate profits, everything is green. Great quarter to Tom says it's credits to him, but anyways. Consumer spending, we spent to 13.1 billion. And if you notice in consumer spending, consumer spent on motor vehicles, like goods and services, and services on healthcare and financial industry, plus $2.1 billion. I felt this was very interesting to see how and where we are spending the money.
Yeah.
And yeah, investment services, business equipment products, and exports increased by 4.4%. Okay, so again, when you look at the GDP by states, 48 states we have increased GDP, and top sectors was mining, which I felt very interesting. Mining and then the oil and gas. That's the main sectors we see the increase in GDP, followed by healthcare and professional technical services. Gross output with respect to dollars for mining increased 20.7%, retail trade has increased, arts and entertainment, they have money to spend, so we're doing that. International transactions deficit also increased. I want you guys to see that because that's impacting our economy. So the transaction deficit has increased to 9.6 billion to $123.1 billion.
This is not anything else. All right, so the unemployment rate. I learned that there's actually 6 different types of unemployment rates. I had no idea until this presentation. So U3 is the official unemployment rate. That's the one that you hear the most often. That's when you hear in the news. And McCall had already given away. That's 4.1 right now in November 2017. And this defines unemployment as those who are willing and able to work, having sought employment within the past 4 weeks. And this is the equation that they use to get to the unemployment rate in U3. This, unfortunately, has come over some criticism because it doesn't include people who have given up looking for work after not finding a job after extended periods of time, who are called marginally attached to the workforce. This does not distinguish differences between full-time, part-time, and contract work. And it is also seasonally adjusted during predictable variations, such as this holiday season when places like Target and whatnot are hiring extra help just for get through seasons, UPS, FedEx, etc.
So is adjusted for that?
It is adjusted for that. So U3 unemployment rate from 2007 to 2017, you can see what spiked during the recession and is now at 4.1%. The alternative rates, the first one is U1. This is the workforce that's been unemployed for 15 weeks or more. So it's the equation. The U2 is workforce that recently lost their jobs or whose temporary jobs ended, contract workers. And then U5, it includes marginally attached labor force. Again, those are people that have given up looking for work after a certain amount of time and not finding a job. U6 is the one that is considered to be the true unemployment rate. This takes all of them into account. So true economic people rely on the U6 to be the most accurate of what percentage of U.S. employment workforce is unemployed.
What's part-time for economic reasons?
I don't know. I got that from the website. I'll have to get back to that.
Sorry.
Yeah.
But you say that's not the one that they actually report?
That's not the one that they
Yeah.
report U3 because that looks the best.
Yeah, sure.
So, as you can see,
The lowest, right?
Yeah.
So each one of these is a different measure of unemployment?
yes, so here's the U6, so you can see this would be what would be considered the truest unemployment rate, which
And the
is
highest.
closer to 9–10%, whereas U3 is down at 4.1.
Yeah, that's what we said. You have to add about 3 to 3.5%
Yeah.
into the one that is imported.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, if so, how this unemployment data is collected? So that the Bureau of Labor and Statistics (BLS) does this every month. They do interviews conducted by phone, and it utilizes a current population survey to sample approximately 60,000 homes, which is around 110,000 individuals. This is categorized by demographics, and the sample is rotated. That 75% of the people who were surveyed remain the same month to month, and 50% of them remain the same from year to year. So as a scientist, I think it's a little bit of a skewed way to get some data, but it seems to work. So to get some demographics, unemployment rate in the U.S. of men versus women is actually identical, 3.7%. By racial demographics, the white American is at 3.7, Black American is at 7.3, Asian American is at 3.0, and Latino American is at 4.7. What is the unemployment rate based on education level? So if you have no diploma, it's about 5.2%. If you have a high school diploma, it's 4.3%. If you have an associate's degree, it's 3.6%. And if you have a bachelor's or higher, it's at 2.1%. That's the highest that I was able to find on the website. When you go to the BLS website, they give you parameters that you can filter through over 30,000 filters. You can, if you want to figure out what the unemployment rate is in Nebraska of Asian hog farmers, you can find it. You just have to find the right thing. It's a lot. So luckily they had like most often filtered, and that's why I used it. Otherwise, I've been still going through all to figure out all these things. So the unemployment rate by state, you can see New Jersey at 4.7, so we're slightly higher than the average, where the highest is in New Mexico and the lowest is in South Dakota. So it seems like the Midwest area seems to be the least amount of unemployment. For what reason? I don't know.
Is that the U3?
This would be the U3, yeah.
Well, it's a fraction, right? So, is the number of the labor force is the number of people
Yeah,
that are
that's
there,
right,
right?
exactly.
That's the best way to explain it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a fraction that you take. You have to say the denominator and then denominator. I mean, you see, at those states especially, who is there? Nobody's there.
It's true.
Yeah, I mean,
One
that's the
guy
way
is
it
in South Dakota without a job, the other 10 people have a job.
It always bothers me why they call it the Midwest. When you're on the West Coast, it's like the big, I don't know how they just decide that's the Midwestern states. And then, how does U.S. compare to other countries? So, I couldn't find one for U.S., but North America is at 5.1%, whereas European Union is at 8.5%, and the Middle East is the highest with 11.1%, and South Asia, where they work themselves to death and stuff like that, it's 3.8%. So, that's, you know, and the global is around 5.7% average.
Yeah, I mean, this is standard in Europe, especially, you know, about 8-9%.
Yeah.
Even, you know, 20 years when I was there was the same. But this is standard. I mean, that's why the United States was, once it was to 10%, 9% during the crisis, everybody was panicking, you know, how do we want to account for that? But there they already had those social programs, you know, the unemployment benefits, you know, the welfare programs and so on. And this is what we call, you know, in economics, the automatic stabilizers. You know, they kicked into the economy once the economy goes down. So they already had them there. We have them there now too. But we went through the crisis in order to develop it.
And I'll pass it on to Angela.
All right. So, inflation is the ongoing rise in the level of prices in the economy. And the Bureau of Labor Statistics, they measure it using the Consumer Price Index (CPI). Also, like Ed, I didn't know that there were multiple CPIs. I thought it was just one. But when you hear CPI, really it's the CPI-U. It's the Consumer Price Index in urban areas. And that's the one that's printed because this is the one with the highest population, right? In the US, it's at 80.7. So what I'm going to talk about is here's the agenda. We're going to see from the Bureau of Labor Statistics what month and year is summarized. What was the CPI-U for the month? What was the rate of inflation for the month? How does the rate of inflation compare with the rate for the previous 12 months? And which two categories had the greatest and lowest price increases over the period? The other thing that I forgot to mention was that when somebody mentions the CPI, it's also important to know, are they saying the CPI from now to the previous month or for the previous 12 months? Wrong way. Okay, so when you go into the website, you'll see this at the very top. This is cut off, but you'll see what the current month and year, and they'll have it posted there. It'll say, in our case, this is recent, it's November 2017. For December, it'll be posted January 12th. So right now, when you go there, you'll see that the current inflation rate for the U.S. Will be posted for the past 12 months, ended in November 2017. Okay, and this is where we get this figure. The November 2017 CPI, this is for all items, is 236.669. And when you say all items, I wasn't able to fit the entire items, but it's what they call the market of goods. And they have like your most typical purchases. It gets very granular. Bread, eggs. What percentage the urban consumers, how much of their income are they spending on all these items? Okay, so the Consumer Price Index, CPI, rose 0.4% in November from the preceding month. and it shows you there the website. Again, it's, I mentioned before, it's important to state that the CPI figure is it for the 12 months or just for the previous month. And here we see that it's 0.4 at November 2017. Okay. The current inflation rate for the U.S. For the past 12 months is 2.2%, and that's the figure all the way to the right. The other question that we wanted to answer for inflation is what's the highest which one has been the highest increase in the market of goods? The highest one that we see is fuel oil. It's at 18.6%, highest over a 1 year period. Second is actually a tie between motor fuel and gasoline. It's at 16.5. Okay, and the lowest, which was actually a price decrease, is used cars and trucks and apparel. The used cars and trucks is at negative 2.1, so it dropped, and then apparel dropped to negative 1.6. You know, I always enjoy whenever I'm at a dinner table and you have the older folks when they start talking about prices and they say, oh my God, when I was 10 years ago, 20, when I was younger, we used to pay X amount for that item. Even myself, I'm surprised. Like when I last time I checked the price of potato chips, and I remember as a kid running to the store with a quarter and getting a bag of potato chips. But now you go now, I think I don't even know what it is now. But I mean, I think last time I $1.25 or something. So, but you see the comparing from 1970 to 2014, pound of ground beef, from 0.66 cents to $4.16. And this, of course, also depends on where you live. It might be higher in some areas. Pound of butter, 1970, 87 cents. In 2014, $2.93. Movie tickets, 817. I think it rolled out, but for our area, it's a lot higher. Yeah, it's very high. Yeah, I made a mistake. It's been a long time since I've been to the movies. I took my son, who's at the age that can now watch a movie. He wanted to bring his little cousins, so I'm like, all right, if I bring them, man, there was like 3 of them, and I went. That's
the credit card.
That was a Batman Lego movie that we saw.
That's funny.
Yeah. It's the last time I went to the movie. So.
Did you go to a dining movie theater? Or?
No, it was a regular, yeah. So then the popcorn soda too.
And you're gonna fall asleep in those comfy chairs anyway.
So the homes, you have in 1970 a house for $22,000. Yeah. In 2014, $280,000. Again, depending on where you live.
So probably Dallas or somewhere down south.
Yeah.
Well, that's North Dakota.
North Dakota.
So a new car. Imagine buying a new car for $3,000. Yeah. I don't think so. It's
You get a
$32,531.
bicycle for $3,000.
Yeah, that's how much people spend on bicycles. Right? A gallon of gasoline, you'll hear that a lot, right? 36 cents in 1970, $3.36 in 2014. Also, your hourly wage, $3.23, and now $19.55 for the manufacturing worker. Then, winners and losers from inflation. Obviously, it benefits some, and it doesn't benefit others. For lenders, they lose, and for borrowers, they gain. The reason is, for example, suppose a bank issues a 30-year mortgage to buy a house at a fixed interest rate of 5% per year, costing $1,000 per month. As inflation rises, the cost of that $1,000 per month decreases, which benefits the homeowner. Savers, also, it doesn't favor them. Unless if the money is saved in an interest-bearing account that is at or higher of the inflation rate. People living off a fixed income, people that are retired, they see a decline in their purchasing power, and consequently their standard of living.
Even though, to add a note here, the Social Security, increases with inflation, though. I mean, there is it's like the COLA that you have, the cost of living adjustment in a contract. There is the same thing in the Social Security. As inflation goes up, the benefits of Social Security go up too.
Gotcha.
so that the retirees do not get hit.
Yeah.
Because they cannot go back to work, so you gotta protect them somehow.
I'll have to talk to my source about that.
Well, I mean, if you're Social Security is one thing. If you're also depending on the amount of savings you have saved up, and that's not getting any bigger, and you don't have it in a
Yeah.
interest-bearing
In an
account
interest-bearing account, or
that's keeping up
investment
with
account.
inflation,
Yeah.
then you still are in trouble.
Right.
Even if you had an interest-bearing account, those interest-bearing accounts are making less and less and less currently. So, you know, you're definitely below the rate of inflation. So yeah, I think you're right.
Still could be. So, right.
Like CDs usually get much better now.
Yeah, but you get nothing back. I mean,
Yeah.
Right.
so then you pay capital gains even in the ones that you get back.
Yeah.
Don't forget that. Yeah.
CDs are dead man.
Yeah.
Landlords, anybody here old landlords? I'm one myself. So if you know, with a fixed mortgage or no mortgage, as they are able to rise their rents more each year. Yeah, taxes. So, yeah.
We like the duplex he put in, right?
Yeah, his recently seeing the Lego movie.
Yes.
influenced this maybe.
Oh,
What the
maybe
Lego
that's
movie, Lego
why.
Batman?
Maybe he works for Lego.
Yeah.
It's free advertising.
Yeah. The entire economy must absorb repricing costs, as price lists, labels, menus, and more have to be updated, to be printed out with new prices. If the domestic inflation rate is greater than that of other countries, domestic products become less competitive. That's what I have. That's next. That's it.
Good
Any
job,
questions?
Nice.
And the
Thank you.
website that
I got cut off.
So you guys clocked in at probably about, what, 40 minutes?
we'll send you the
No,
final
they started
presentation.
right at
We had a
22.
resources page, a
I've
couple
been
of
trying
things,
to-
so.
Yes, nice to
I'll
know.
Some slides are cut off.
That's okay.
Whatever.
So there are some, the websites are really good, we'll send the deck if anybody's interested.
Be a lot.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Good job, guys.
Yeah. I spent some time there.
Yeah.
So it's up to you to be
Thank you.
Good
Unemployed
statistics.
more now. California. They have it. Oh, I looked at their case. They
Oh,
want to
they're
use
using
it. I don't know.
You guys use it?
Yeah, we can.
We're done for 2 weeks.
I'm gonna look that up. Site.
You want me to send it to you first?
Yep.
You can
No plug?
Can I use your laptop?
I might actually.
Will I use my laptop? Yeah. Are you guys attached to Google Slides?
No, I put them. They usually. It's not good. They usually. That's what
Sure, we can meet you there. Well, I parked in my garage. Park there.
Alright, so let's see.
Okay. Well, Santa Con. You know what I mean? Now where you park.
Just do it with interpretive dates. Scrolling. Non-residential.
Thanks for your time. See virtual teams.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, right?
No, sorry, this one right there, yeah.
John, what do you got?
That last presentation was all you, with the rates.
Remember we asked this question, which quarter is it decrease?
Right, yeah.
So this is the quarter.
Yeah.
So I just want to, yeah, I just want to share, but then towards the end, yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so for today's presentation we are covering actually two topics. The first one would be private non-residential fixed investment, and second would be current economic condition of US using wage book. So in today's agenda, we would be going over, we would be first explaining what is private fixed investment, what are different types of private fixed investment. Then we would go mainly under one of the private fixed investment, which is non-residential fixed investment. Within that non-residential fixed investment, we would go over structures and equipment and software. Then we would compare the fixed investment in 2017 fixed investment with the other years. We would also try to come up with a forecast for non-residential fixed investment. On the later section of our presentation, we would go over the wage book, then consumer spending trends in the 12 districts, and then we would compare the strengths and weaknesses of our local district, which is New York, with the other 11 districts. So, what is private fixed investment? So, private fixed investment measures spending by private businesses, non-profit organizations, and households on fixed assets in the US economy. Now, what are fixed assets? Fixed assets consist of structure, equipment, and software that are used to produce goods and services. Now, private fixed investment encompasses the creation of new assets, improvement of the existing assets, and replacement of worn out or obsolete assets. What does private fixed investment indicate? So it's all dollar amount, but what does it indicate? It indicates the amount of trust that investor has in our economy. If we see a trend that from the previous year or from the previous quarter, if the amount of investment is increasing, it means that the investors are willing to invest in this economy and they are willing to produce more. If on the other perspective, if you think about it, if the investment is decreasing over time, it means that investors are losing faith in the economy. Or maybe a new government came in who created a certain policy that people doesn't like, the investor is not liking, they are reluctant to produce more. So it's kind of, it gives an indicator how our economy is doing. What are the different types of private fixed investment? So if you see, private fixed investment are broadly classified as non-residential and residential. Within non-residential, there are structural, equipment, and intellectual properties, where structures are commercial and healthcare buildings, equipments are software and technologies, and the intellectual properties are research and entertainment buildings. So these are all kind of the fixed assets. So on the residential side, it has two structures and equipment. Structure being the private homes, the multi-family, single-family home that we live in, and equipments are software and technologies that we use at home. For example, internet or Microsoft Office that we use, that softwares. For our presentation, we would be concentrating on the non-residential part, because that's the most, if you'll see the numbers, those are the bigger part for this total private fixed investment. On the next section, John would be going over the main, which is the main topic of our presentation in non-residential. So he would be going a little deeper in all these numbers that you see here. He would be like describing whether it is volatile, non-volatile, what are the trends, and what are things that we can drive from these numbers. So,
so this graph shows the percentage and change of the non-residential fixed investment. What you see down here is the different quarters, and then these graphs represent the volatility of the percent change. So as you can see, the volatility is pretty great from here to here, from here to here, And then even from here up, it's still pretty great. I mean, you have a little bit of leveling off here, a little bit of leveling off, a little bit of leveling off. But really the peaks and valleys are pretty volatile within the total percent change from the previous quarter. So when we look at this graph, we have to somehow bring some type of correlation to why this is occurring. There has to be some theory behind it. So what we felt after assessing this, and for us it's really the only logical thing that we could really break down without knowing exactly what companies are trying to do, is really maybe their budgets. Because if you look at the first quarter and the second quarter, they have a lot of money to spend and they're up here you know, doing a lot of investing. And then when they drop down to quarter 3 and 4, typically when businesses look towards the following year and look to invest their money for the following year, they try to pull back on some of those investments and they try to rein in their spending. And we were attesting maybe this volatility to that type of savings. And then once you get into quarter 1 and 2, you see the spending shoot way back up again. So the theory that we had behind this type of percent change was basically just budgeting and the way companies typically spend their money throughout the year. The next thing that we look at is the different breakdowns of non-residential fixed income. You have structures, and then you have equipment and software. Obviously, equipment and software is a bigger component here. A lot more money is spent since 2015. Recently, in modern business, a lot more money is spent in equipment and software as opposed to structures. And you can see that the money that's spent remains pretty consistent across the line for structures and equipment and software. What we took from this was that companies are looking to invest more in technology, looking to invest more into network infrastructure. They're coming along with the modern age of business, and there's a lot more maintenance required for equipment and software, so there's a lot more money that goes into it, whereas structures is pretty much a one-time purchase. There's always a little bit of maintenance here and there, but it's never necessary to do upgrades and stuff when it comes to construction, but the structures themselves are one-time purchases, and it's also based on a lot of things like, you know, interest rates at the time and mortgage rates and stuff like that. So really what we came up to the conclusion here was that equipment and software is a bigger component, and there's a lot more that goes into it, and it's not just software and technology, it's also equipment. So if you look at even the construction industry, you know, tools and machinery, in the distribution industry, you're looking at a lot of trucks that constantly have to get fixed, and cargo ships that go across the ocean for shipping and transportation. So there's a lot more that goes into maintenance of equipment and software. This here is the quarterly change in amount of investment. So these numbers represent the quarterly change in billions. So you'll see here around 2015 and 2016 there was a pretty big decline in how much people were investing. They really weren't doing much investing at all. In 2015 you saw a lot of money being spent on equipment and software, and even along the line, besides these 2 years here, I mean, even along the line, equipment and software hovers right around here, or it's above the line, which once again shows you that equipment and software, you know, it always has to be maintained and money has to be put into it. But then once you look recently, you'll see from 2016 and beyond that things have kind of started doing a lot better and remain consistently high. And even equipment and software took a really big jump, you know, right at the end there. This is a quarterly change in billions for non-residential fixed investment in total. So this is what you're looking at here is in billions, the combination of software, equipment, and structures combined. Once again, you see the decline in the years 2015 into 2016, but then from there you start to see a nice little increase of investment happening across the business landscape, especially now in 2017. This past year, it looks like there was a lot more investment being done. And I think looking at this, you can kind of forecast that investing in equipment and software may be a good investment at this time, just based on the statistics that we're seeing and the